Hi guys, Ali here, and finally we are ready to look at the HTML elements themselves. I would set the expectation straight here by reminding that this is an introduction to basic HTML elements video where we would introduce some top level elements only. The basic ones, since side effect of introducing all at once can include memory loss, nausea, headache, dancing stars, and so many more. So I'll try to save you from all these symptoms and just introduce you to basic elements in this video. Later, we would go over implementing them in a lab or exercise video where you and myself would code HTML together, and depending on importance, there would be dedicated videos on important HTML elements. So let's begin. Right, while we have focused on the most defining feature of the World Wide Web, that is the hyperlink thus far, the document that we created which just had a hyperlink, though functional, is not a proper HTML document as per standard. So a very basic proper HTML document would look like the bottom right of this screen. Oh, a whole bunch of tags. Please pause and take a good look, and we shall go over each item individually and understand them one by one. I must clarify before going further that though HTML is kind of based off XML, it is not XML. It's not even based off XML. It's something called SGML, which is a very lenient kind of XML. They are both languages, and the output of HTML is called HTML document, just like there existed XML document. So important thing to know at this time is though they are 90% similar, there would be HTML specific characteristics in HTML documents. Next, I would like you to bring up http html.spec.wordwg.org or simply Google HTML standard and load the first result, which in all probability would be the same from wordwg.org. This is the living standard, also commonly known as HTML5 of HTML from WG, which, if you recall from our standards portion of World Wide Web video, is the organization responsible for standardizing HTML itself and owner and keeper of its living standard. All HTML specifications and rules, formats, etc. are defined in this page. The page is horrific, I know. Even to a well trained eye, it's complicated, but don't worry, it is a reference for times to come. I just wanted you to know and bookmark this page for the future. You may never open it again in your life. You can consider it to be like a constitution for your country, which anyone hardly ever reads, but it governs their lives. But for legal advice, you go to lawyers, who in our example case would be entities like Stack Overflow, other courses, or my videos, where this standard kind of terms and conditions like document is simplified for your consumption. Once you are expert enough, you can start referencing to it yourself. For now, just know about its existence and importance. Alright, now we shall go over introducing some important HTML elements followed by introduction to DOM, CSS, etc. If you get a feeling we are not covering each item in detail, have no worry. No web development series is complete without detailed coverage of important HTML elements and forms, and this video is part of yet another full stack development series. Reiterating here that this is HTML introduction and it would stay introduction to important HTML concepts only. Since lab or exercise video would come later, but if you want to try seeing the HTML elements we introduce in browser, in another tab open w3schools.com/html. This website has a feature where you can try out HTML editing in an online browser and seeing the results, or just try out existing examples for each type of HTML element. They have pre-built examples you can copy paste in editor too. I would highly recommend typing by hand, but this is a shortcut in case you're not interested. For sake of time, I would go over a subset of elements only, but that website has a comprehensive list which you can keep trying even when I am finished. Alright, so let's begin with the doctype declaration. Note that all HTML documents must start with this declaration. And this is not an HTML tag, it's a declaration. This is an information to the browser about what document type to expect. It essentially tells the browser which document type definition standard the contents of this file should be evaluated against. For HTML5 documents, it is as simple as less than sign, exclamation mark, doctype, space, HTML, and tag close. For older documents like HTML4 or XHTML, it must refer to a document type definition present on w3.org website, just like given in the slide for HTML4. From our history slide, you would know that not all tags are supported in every HTML version. Also, browsers tend to use the standard rendering mode for latest HTML5 versions, and for older versions, something called Quirks mode. In Quirks mode, layout emulates behavior in Navigator 4 and Internet Explorer 5, which are old generation browsers. This is essential in order to support websites that were built before the widespread adoption of web standards. Before adoption of web standards, these versions had evolved with code to render pages differently than their standards adoption. So if you miss a doctype declaration or provide an incorrect doctype, the website is rendered as it would in an old generation Internet Explorer 5 or Navigation 4, which had a lot of custom code to handle many kind of quirks in the documents that they were used to seeing. I must emphasize that legacy or quirks mode is something you should always avoid unless explicitly required. And all you need to do is provide a doctype declaration up top to get the standards mode running. Let's look at HTML tag now. HTML tag or angle bracket HTML tag represents the root of an HTML document and contains all other HTML except the seemingly doctype declaration, which is not even a tag anyway. Again, for valid HTML document, the HTML tag must be defined. It has a bunch of attributes, most important of which is the lang attribute, where you specify the language of document and is really helpful for search engines, etc. Head is an almost top-level element for HTML document and mostly contains elements that have nothing to do with content as such. They include title, style, meta, link, script, and base tags. As you might guess from the list, it is mostly for metadata or data about data in HTML documents and is placed between the HTML body tags. Since that data is about the HTML document, it is not displayed. The most frequently used tag within head, also used in our example, is the title element, which gets displayed in the tab or title bar of the web page. Note that tag is also required element in HTML document and gets displayed in title bar, search engine links, and favorite text. Link tag lets you use an external resource in the current document. In the example on slide, the link element is referring to an external style sheet or CSS file, which would define presentation or styling to be applied on elements in current file. The style element is used to define presentation characteristics or styling to elements like color, size, font, etc. Style can be per element, per container, or per document. The style element in the head element usually defines style for the entire HTML document. The style in the given example would result in your page loading with a black background, and any H1 tag you add anywhere in your document would appear in red color, while paragraphs would have blue text. Style elements were the dominant way of styling HTML documents in website until introduction of CSS. Now it is discouraged in favor of CSS because later allows for defining reusable styles across pages and lets you manage changing them from a style specific file. Inline styles are frowned upon now, so use them as last resort if you really need to. Still great for rapid prototyping, so you should know about these. I know many of the terms I just used have not been introduced yet, but yeah, I'm just about to introduce all of these. CSS or cascading style sheets are used to style the web page from layout to top level elements, elements of a particular type, and even individual elements on the web page. They contain the word cascading, as style applied to a parent element will also be inherited by its child elements. There are three types of CSS: inline, by adding style attributes in any HTML element; internal, you are already familiar with it as defining a style attribute in head section is called internal CSS, and we just covered that. And finally, the external, the most encouraged and useful type, where styles are defined in another external file with .css extension and adding a link to it in the head section via link tag. Browsers apply styles defined in CSS to elements in the web page. CSS are a comparatively different topic and would be covered later in its own video. Just know that contents of style element can be used as is in an external CSS file, and there can be something called classes, which define a set of styling to be applied by name. Another important and related aspect to styling is class attributes. Available on all elements, including HTML and body elements, class attributes is used to point to a class name in a style sheet. For now, this knowledge is enough as we have a lot more to cover. The next required and critically important tag is the body tag, which defines the body of documents or its content. It contains all content of HTML documents like headings, paragraphs, images, links, tables, text, etc. There can be only one body tag in the HTML document. It supports global attributes and events in HTML, something which we shall come to. An HTML document is, well, a document, and the page is supposed to display text in a beautiful way. That was the earliest intention of HTML besides connectivity. So HTML has a lot of support to display a web page as a well-crafted document. To that end, it has 6 pre-built headings H1 to H6. The biggest, boldest, and tallest of them all is H1, followed by H2 all the way to H6. H1 being most important or title subject heading, to H6 being the least important heading, one notch above regular text. Recommended practice is to use H1 only once per page to describe the entire page, and not to skip headings levels, meaning that after H1, don't skip to H3 directly. But these are recommendations, and you can use however you like. One important thing to note here is that this is the point in your journey where you would encounter the first cross browser problem. Let's hear our first legal or terms and conditions style nuanced problem, copying directly from the Living Standard. Because HTML conveys meaning rather than presentation, the same page can also be used by a small browser on a mobile phone without any changes to the page. Instead of headings being in large letters as on the desktop, for example, the browser on the mobile phone might use the same size text for the whole page, but with headings in bold. Reason for emphasizing so much being that this is explicitly about headings, but apply to other HTML elements equally. HTML conveys meaning rather than presentation. This is not heading specific and means HTML is simply asking browser to keep H1 bigger than H2 and so on, but it is not enforcing any style as such. So HTML browsers would ensure H1 is bigger or more emphasizing than H2 all the way to H6, but H1 might not be the same across browsers or across device types using the same browser. As a web developer, you might want to keep this in mind from now on. Discussion on a document cannot be complete without involving the paragraph element that, as its name implies, defines a paragraph. Browsers add a single blank line before and after each paragraph element, and this is how it is distinguished from other text in the HTML document. Images are worth 1,000 words or other elements you can say. The wonder tag image or img lets you specify an image which can either be loaded locally or from a URL. You have an example provided on this slide. Here browser would try to show an image from file profilepic.jpg placed alongside the HTML file in the same folder. It doesn't matter if HTML file is on your computer or a web server, the file must be present alongside HTML file. You can provide a relative path like /images/profilepic.jpg or a full file or web path like http://mywebserver.com/images/profilepic.jpg. The picture would be embedded at the location in web page where this tag is defined. Image tag creates a holding space for the referenced image in the web page. It has two required and several optional attributes. The required ones are source and alt, source being the image source file, and alt is a piece of text that specifies an alternate text for the image. Something to show if the image cannot be displayed due to network error, file not found, or any other reason. Optionally, you can specify height and width of image, though not required. It is always best to specify those as they allocate space for image during the first render and avoid flickering. Do remember text is displayed first and images are shown after they are downloaded. We shall look further into performance, rendering and styling and location of images later in the series, but having height and width made known to browser drastically improves its performance. You can use a sizes attributes to indicate image sizes for different page layout, something I would just stop here about. Another very useful feature supported by HTML is to use an image as hyperlink. To do that, simply put an image as contents of a hyperlink element, just like in the example at the bottom. Now you would see that the mouse changing shape as a clickable link when you hover over the image. You can add bunch of styling to images to make them appear as desired in web pages. There are a ton of styling options for images which are beyond scope of introduction to HTML elements video due to time constraint. That is enough for images for now. Next very important element is lists. Lists are a commonly used element in HTML and come in two flavors, ordered and unordered list. Feel free to try it out in an HTML page or the W3 Schools website and note that the OL list would be sorted alphabetically by the browser and show with numbers, while UL would be a bulleted list in the same order as you specified, like in the example. Again, the styling is browser specific, where you can control presentation with styling attributes or CSS. Note the lists are highly customizable through cascading style sheet or other styling attributes, but more on that later. Right, let's cover another very important and frequently used element, which is the table element. Table element defines an HTML table where table tag appears once. TR marks the heading or table row, defining the header, and TH are the individual header elements defining a column. TD elements define a table cell listing the contents of each column of the table, starting from first on the left to the nth. There is much more to table elements that they are one of the most used features of HTML, but we are limited by time budget, so more on that later on. For now, just need to know the basics. A web developer would probably spend a good amount of time with form element, which is used to display a form to the user to gather data from him and submit to a web server. Here's a form with two input fields and one submit button. If you ever signed up using your username and password on some website, you have entered data into a form field. I would just take a minute to go over some important related form elements that appear in its contents. Input element specifies an input field in the form where user can enter data. It is the most important form field and can take different shape depending on type attribute like checkbox, file, password, text, etc. Unless explicitly specified, the type is text. There are a bunch of other form fields that we can quickly go over. Text area is a multi-line text input control used to make comments or reviews. Button is a clickable button. Its content can be text or image. Its most important attributes is type, which indicates its purpose like submit, reset, etc. Option tag shows a drop-down list with multiple options. Labels, as the name suggests, are the text portion describing the purpose of input fields in a form. Forms would most definitely be covered in a later video. Another critically important HTML element that we can't go away any further without is div. It is an invisible element, does not have a shape of its own, but acts only as a container for other elements. It's just like body element in this regard, but while there can be only one body element in HTML file, there can be as many divs as you like. What's the point, you would correctly ask? Well, it lets you organize elements in HTML file in logical containers. Each div has an ID and can have its own styling attributes, which get descended to children if not overwritten. Take a note, even if you don't understand it fully, as I assure you, you would probably use it more often than any other element during your development journey. Right, we covered some very basic HTML elements so far. This is not a full coverage by any means. Even a quick introduction to basic elements is time consuming, and this is too much terminology to digest in one video alone. We shall cover some of these in details later on. Now let's go over some other aspects of an HTML document that you must know about. Again, I would just give you a very brief overview of them, as some of them require not just a video but their own playlist. Right, global attributes. Global attributes are HTML attributes that are available to be applied on all HTML elements, even the top level HTML element. I would just introduce a few here and you can look up in the rest in the Living Standard or W3 Schools website. The most important one is the ID attribute, which lets you assign a unique identifier to an HTML element. If you venture into scripting or styling via external CSS, ID takes absolute center place in identifying the element to style or manipulate via script. CSS can even contain style for a particular ID by name and would be auto-applied to an element with the given ID. ID is unique and cannot be duplicated within a document. It is also case sensitive. It is even more essential in scripting, which we would cover next, and there it allows you to select an element using a universal getElementById method. Another important global attribute which you would be using is class. Again used by styles and scripts, it lets you point to a class name in a style sheet, where a set of styling info is present against a class name. Browser would apply that styling to any elements which bear the class attribute with that name. Multiple elements can point to the same class name, very helpful when you need to have consistent styling for a group or type of elements. Class is used by scripts too, where elements can be selected for manipulation using a class name. Last and not too important but sometimes useful global attribute is hidden, which lets you create a hidden element, which browser would not render, but it can be enabled by a script to be displayed when required. An example being some error like password incorrect, which only needs to be shown in certain cases. The HTML element, which sounds scary to new developers when it shouldn't, is script tag. This is scary as it is a doorway which takes them from relatively simple HTML language to another language usually called JavaScript. There can be other scripting languages, but JavaScript is de facto standard of the web, so we shall stick to this. The script tag is also used to embed a client-side script in the HTML document. What is a script? Well, script is a piece of executable code which lets you manipulate elements in the file using a scripting language like JavaScript. The reason I said it's scary for most is the fear of unknown. Like, I am sure you are tired listening to a stream of new terminology by now, and now I am introducing a totally different world to you, which you are not yet ready to absorb. That is why I will introduce you to scripting only, and we shall discuss it in detail later on after you are comfortable with HTML and other web terminology, and then you would find it easy to work with. There is nothing much to it, just have a look at that simple script given in the slide. Remember I told you about a global attribute called ID that is present on all elements and is used to uniquely identify an element on the web page? Now, if you have any element, say a paragraph element, with ID attribute with the value being demo, that script would add content hello JavaScript to it. This is a very simple example and you can do an absolute ton of stuff with your website with JavaScript. Again, saying full playlist can be dedicated to that word, so this start is enough for now. As a final statement, a script tag can contain scripting statements inline, like example given above, or refer to an external script file through source attribute. Now that we know how scripting works, or at least have some idea, let's quickly get sense of events. There are a bunch of global events that can be provided to your JavaScript code on important milestones or actions. Some of these include onload, which lets you know the page has finished loading, and your script can do a bunch of stuff in response. And there's on resize, which lets you know that user is meddling with a browser size, and you can manipulate your elements accordingly to the new size, like hide some elements, make text smaller, or add ellipses to some text elements which had lengthy text earlier with no longer fits. On online lets you run some scripts if browser goes in offline mode or comes back online from a network failure, so you can respond to your web page accordingly, like let user know he can no longer submit a form or query items from the web server by showing an alert message. Our last item to cover is an introduction to DOM. DOM, or Document Object Model, is a programming aspect of HTML where an HTML document is parsed and loaded into memory by the browser, and an API or application programming interface is provided to the scripting language to manipulate that in memory representation. Is it confusing or scary? No. You just used DOM a second ago on the scripting slide. Note we did document.find element by ID and passed demo as the argument in our script. That operation is performed not on the text file, but on the document loaded in memory by the browser. When you edit inner HTML to the demo element, your HTML file on the disk was not modified, but your web page was. How? The browser found the element in memory with the ID demo and added the inner HTML you provided to its contents, and loaded that portion of page to show the modified content. DOM lets you know all kind of crazy things with the HTML document shown in the browser while not modifying contents of your HTML file. Browser lets you manipulate the DOM by using document or window objects which represent your HTML document. You can find elements by ID, class, attribute, and whatnot. Add, remove, or modify elements, change their styling, add, remove attributes on them, make them responsive to events like online, offline, response to event like mouse clicks or button clicks, and a whole lot more. It makes it really simple by letting you play with a tree-like representation of HTML document and its elements. You can query children or parents of a given element or perform operations on all elements of a specific type, like change color of all paragraph element on a web page or a div element to green. Like HTML, DOM has its own history of evolution, where first draft was issued in 1998 when scripting was still in its early times. And like browsers, there were a bunch of scripting languages in use with similar issues as with HTML itself. I won't go over these details here, but know that since 2015, DOM specification 4 is the latest published standard. We'll cover further details in a dedicated DOM video. Congratulations, you made it to end of the video, which it seemed would never finish. My throat is as dry as your eyes and ears. Let's hydrate. Please do practice the concepts learned in the video on your computer or W3 School's website, as there are all important elements. If you liked the video, please give a thumbs up and share the video, and do consider subscribing to the channel to be notified of upcoming content. See you in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.